So yeah, we were talking about your exams. They're expecting to schedule it somewhere around January. So our protocol is, let's finish off, be ready for the exam whenever they are going to schedule it. So plan for now is by about early November, the first 2 weeks of November, we should be able to finish our syllabus. So today we are going to go through Colombo Stock Exchange in detail. We will finish off equity market within the first 1 hour itself, and then we will go into Colombo Stock Exchange. And then I have scheduled an extra lesson, extra double lesson for you on Tuesday, which is a holiday. So we are more starting from morning 8 going on till 12 o'clock. So that day I request for all of you to join in, because on that particular one session or the double session together which I'm doing, I'm going to focus on structured financial products and derivatives. So both the topics are going to be covered on that day, because both of those are related. It's actually a benefit if we go through at once, but don't worry, it won't be a rush. I'll be taking it slowly, making sure that you understand, because I get that debt and equity are somewhat, easily relatable to some of the students. But when it comes to structured financial products or even derivatives, because the usage is very less in our current market, the awareness to the students or the ability to relate to them is a very bit, a little rare or less. So don't worry, we'll tackle those topics in detail. And we are going to go through Forex in the upcoming Saturday lessons. And then finally, having tackled the debt market, the equity market, the structured finance market, derivative market, and then the Forex market, finally, we will move our focus into the regulator, who is that? The Securities and Exchange Commission. You know that the Securities and Exchange Commission have recently, they have put out a new act which is effective from September 21st. So there's a new SEZ Act, which is a challenge for your batch, because earlier batches have the old act that they tackled with. So in the past papers, the ability for you to, test your knowledge with the new act is a bit rare. So even the 3 session, the guys who have their exams pending for the past 3 sessions can be facing a disadvantage. But let's not take a, chance at the exam. We will go through both the updated, the new act as well as the old act. Let's see where the differences are, so that, we are prepared. Well, let's see, because there are so many differences that when I went through the two acts that I wanted to highlight, from the composition to the duties to the funds, especially with regarding to the power of the SEC, the ability to, enforce fines, to enforce, any legal action. The offenses of the act have all changed. So don't worry, we'll go through both the acts, the old one and the new, so you are better, you're better prepared for the exam. And then finally we will have the financial market service providers. So all this will be covered by the, first 2 weeks of November. And then after that you will have your revision. So I'm allowing 1 month for you all to be prepared for your exams. You can do your own studies, refer back the notes, and of course I'm there available to you through via email. If you have any concerns, you can drop your mails. I will be there to answer you. Okay. So with that clear plan ahead, we'll get into our lesson for today. So we were going through stock market. In particularly, we were focusing on short selling. We started focusing on short selling last week, the importance of short selling as a technique and the risks of short selling as a technique. Then we understood what a stock symbol is, or whenever they call the word ticker, what it actually means. And I also hope that you all were able to go through the YouTube video last week. The one I shared via email, I hope that gave you another additional awareness relating to the stock market. And then, of course, we started going through the types of orders in the stock market. Now, how these types of the stock orders are going to be tested in your exam can vary. Sometimes it appears on your MCQ. They give a nature of the order and they ask you to pick the type of the order, whether it's a market, limit, good till cancel, day order, or so forth. Or it might come to the section B, where they ask you to compare and contrast two types of orders. So be ready to tackle on both aspects. Finally, we were going through stock market indices. Here it has to be stock market index or indices. So there we first saw why an index was important to the market. I highlighted to you before as well. Index in very simple term is an indication on how the stock market is moving. For you to know whether the market moved positively, moved negatively, just by looking at the index, you could get that idea. You could get the overall picture. It's an averaging out picture that you would see. In addition to that, there are some other users as well. And on the final point, I highlighted to you that indices are now being used to form index funds. So be aware on what an index fund is. That was one of the, the idea was promoted by Warren Buffett, where he said this one statement that he made. He said, irrespective of what the fund managers do, at the end, it's the market which overtakes everyone's performance. So based on that premise is how the index fund was introduced. All right. So then we started going through the stages of development in an index. Here, how the indices started was from a price weighted index level. So there they only use the price of the stock to weight that stock. So if the price of that particular share was a very high price, let's say it was 1,000 rupees, then that particular stock got the highest weightage in the index. Let's say there was another stock whose price is only 2 rupees, then that particular share only got a lesser weightage in the index. But what was the downfall with this? Price alone doesn't tell you how the market reacted. You and I, when we started, going through equity market, I highlighted it to you when we were particularly studying about stock split. I told you if the price of a stock is so huge or so expensive, the retail involvement in that particular share will be very less. If I have 1,000 and the price of that share is 1,000, I can only buy one share. But if a price of a share is 2 rupees, I can buy several shares. So as a retail standalone investor, most of the investors would prefer the lesser price stocks. All right. So when you have such a demand for the low price stocks and the index is giving a higher weightage to the high price stock, is it fair? Is the index actually showing what the market is doing? No. Due to this drawback, they said, look here, price alone will not be sufficient to weight the share. We have to include the number of shares as well. So I have price, which I'm already considering. Now I am going to bring in the number of shares of that particular company as well. Now you have to think. I have the market price. I'm going to include the number of shares as well, which means I am going to use market capitalization to weight the shares into the index. So what happened here was they took the entire market capitalization of the companies to assign weights for that particular company in the index. Again, this resolved the drawback that we saw in the price weighted index. But this formed a new issue. What was the new issue? We are considering 100% of the shares here. But the argument brought forward by several activists was that Look here, yes, we are considering 100% of the shares, but in the stock exchange, where shares are traded publicly, only a lesser percentage of shares are available for the public to trade. Why? Most of the companies are owned by another company who has a staggering percentage of ownership, usually more than or at least 50%. Okay, so that 50% of shares do not get traded often. They are like pretty much stagnated. Our example was Nestle Lanka. I told you the parent company of Nestle wouldn't be trading their shares every day because their intention is not to get capital gains or dividends. Dividends, yes, but not capital gains. They are looking to retain ownership of the company. So whatever that is left for the public is not the 100% of the share itself, it's very less. So the argument was brought forward saying, look here, considering 100% or the total number of shares of that particular company is not correct. We need to only consider the free float number of shares. What does it mean by free float number of shares? Free float meaning the number of shares available for the public, for you and me to actively trade in the market without such shares being held by a holding company or the owner or the government. So when you take that quantum, when you take the free float number of shares and multiply it with the market price, yes, we get market capitalization, but we call it the free float adjusted market capitalization. Okay, free float adjusted market capitalization. It's not the market capitalization, it's going to be lesser than that. Why? We are only considering shares which are free float or publicly available for purchase. Why were they advocating this? Because public are buying these free float shares. So that activity is what happens in the market. So an index should capture this activity. So the better base or the index was now being based on, most of the indices are now being based on the free float adjusted market capitalization. Okay, but understand there was a move from price weighted indices to value weighted indices. The drawback from only basing your weightage on price was understood, where they had moved away from price weighted. Now most of the markets are focused on value weighted indices. Okay, where not only price but number of shares are also considered. So value weighted indices are of two types. You have market capitalization and then you have the free float adjusted market capitalization. So most of the markets operate with an index which are value weighted, and even in that majority fall into the free float adjusted market capitalization index. What is your goal in studying this? You need to know how the indices developed over time. What are the the current indices in the globe, on a global scenario, what are they being based on at the moment, and what is this free float adjusted market capitalization? Okay, I hope that's clear for you. So with that, we are moving to the last part of our chapter. We are going into stock valuation. So if you remember, even when we spoke about debt instruments, we understood the market, the instruments, everything. And then finally, we had the bond valuation. But in stock valuation, it's a bit different. Stock valuation, you're not going to have any calculations per se, because the stock valuation techniques are very advanced. There are two ways that you could use to value a stock. Now think about this. What are you going to do? You are going to value a share of a company. What is a share of a company? It highlights ownership of that company. Correct? So if a share is going to reflect ownership of the company, if you buy that, you become the owner of the company. The cash flow arising from the share depends on the future of that company. Am I wrong? So you're going to own a company. That particular share is going to give you that ownership. As a owner, what is your intention? You expect cash inflows. So the cash inflow to you, the profit, the dividend is going to be based on the company's performance. So how the company is going to perform is going to decide your cash inflow. So the most stable or the most fundamental way to value a stock is to use fundamental analysis. What do you mean by fundamental analysis? Here, our focus is going to be on what is the future of this company? What is going to be the future performance of this company? How is it going to benefit us? So if you're going to focus on the future of a company, can you just look at only that company? Is the company operating in isolation? No. It operates in an economy. It operates in an industry. It operates competing with other companies. So your analysis is going to be very deep and vast. It would start from a macro perspective and then move on to the micro level. So an ideal fundamental analysis. Let's say we are talking about a textile manufacturer. Okay, our example is a textile manufacturer. So on a macro scale, will they only focus on Sri Lanka? No, they will look at the entire global demand. They would be obviously an exporter. So a textile manufacturer, a local textile manufacturer will look the fashion trends globally, will look for the demand for textiles and the garments globally, the tax concessions given globally, how it trickles down to their local country, that benefit being given out to the industry in the local context. How is the textile industry performing? What are their drawbacks? Are they having labor issues, resource issues, import issues, machinery issues? All those you have to look at. And then you move into your competitor. Do you have another competitor in the segment, or are you the sole supplier? Who are your customers? Do you have the ability to raise price of your customer? All these are analyzed in detail, and then finally these are put into a forecast. You will forecast the next 5 years of this company. Usually on a practical sense, it happens for 3 to 5 years. Okay, they forecast 3 to 5 years of that company's future performance, future position, future cash flows, and then value the company's share based on the future performance. So when you do a fundamental analysis, you have a lot of assumptions. You assume global demand will grow by this percentage, country will develop by this percentage, resource price will increase by this percentage. A lot of assumptions. But remember, these assumptions are informed assumptions. I can't just wake up and say, okay, I think global demand is going to increase by 10%. When you're coming to such an assumption, you are going to read the IMF Global Outlook Forecast. You will look through the World Bank Global Forecast, certain sector forecasts given by international institutions. You will read up a lot before you come to your assumption. Okay. Another way for you to do is technical analysis. What is this technical analysis? Now, so I told you in the stock exchange or in the stock exchange, you will have two types of investors. One investor is someone who will put the money. Now, this is a long-term market, no? So they will want to put the money, hold it for a long time and earn a good dividend and a good capital gain. But then you will find another investor who's more like a trader who wants quick money. What do? They speculate. Okay, this share will move tomorrow by 2 rupees. Let's buy it today and sell it tomorrow. That is their trading style. They buy today, sell tomorrow. Their investment horizon is not to hold it for a long time, not expecting dividend, but their focus more on capital gain. So which return are you focused on will decide your trading style. So imagine for a trader who buys today, sells tomorrow. There are certain traders who buy in the morning and sell by afternoon. Such quick traders. So for them, can they spend time and effort doing these fundamental analysis? This fundamental analysis is going to take a lot of effort and a lot of time. So for a trader to spend so much of time before they make such a quick investment is going to be a unpreferable thing. So what they adopt is something called technical analysis. What do? They look at the past price movement. They look at the past volume movement. They look at that and they decide the future movement of the share. They just see, okay, look here, this share has reached this as the high price, has hit a low of this price in the last quarter. The movement have been in such a way. Let's take the moving averages. Okay, this is the bandwidth. The lowest is this, highest is this. This is the bandwidth it's moving. So I can expect the same pattern for the future as well. So based on that guess, they take that risk and they trade in the stock market. These are the two differences or the main differences between fundamental analysis and technical analysis. We'll go through the differences now in detail. Fundamental analysis, when you do, your focus or your entire study is going to be based on the company's future financial performance in the environment where it's operating, economic and also industrial. How the company will perform in the industry, how the company will perform in the economy. But if you take technical analysis, you don't do such kind of a macro level study or an industry level study. No. You simply study the past pattern of the share price. You understand, you get their moving averages. There are certain techniques called oscillators. So using that, you see how the price is moving. Whether the price is in the, now these are a bit technical, but looking at the price movement and certain, there are certain measurements that you use. Using those measurements, you can understand whether the share is in the overbought territory or the overselling territory, or whether it's in the underbuy territory or in the undersell territory. So looking at that, just the price movement, they will make their call whether to invest or not. The focus is they are not looking at the future of the company. They are looking at just the past pattern of the share price. Why are they doing that? Because they are not going to be in this share for the future. They are going to buy today, sell tomorrow, sell latest by 1 week. Some traders don't even hold like that. Okay. So due to their trading style, they opt for a technical analysis. Fundamental analysis, because their focus is on financial performance, what they try to do is they try to predict the future performance of the company. They study the economy, they study the industry, go through the patterns, the demand patterns. Looking at that, they will forecast the financial performance of the company. But in technical analysis, you will predict the future price pattern, and your prediction is going to be based on that the past pattern is going to repeat in the future as well. So the premise of technical analysis is, look here, the past pattern is going to continue in the future. Fundamental analysis takes qualitative and quantitative factors into consideration. Now, what do you mean by qualitative techniques? Quantitatives, of course, you know, demand values, let's say certain increases in the market on a quantitative basis. Now, if you take fuel companies such as, let's say, Lanka IOC, which is listed, so for them, quantitative would be the number of vehicles registered newly. The now, let's say there is an increase in the electric vehicles, then that's a concern for them. Okay, so those belong to the quantitative macro factors. Qualitative factors as well. Qualitative factors such as the provincial penetration. How is the fuel consumption in the western province? How is the fuel consumption in other regions? How are the lifestyle development patterns in other provinces? Because for someone to use a fuel, it would start off with a income, certain level of an income level, correct? So increase in the income level is a good indication for such a company. When a person's income level increases, obviously they will move to a better vehicle. Then of course a better vehicle would call for a better quality fuel as well. So that lifestyle development, the per capita increases, those have to be administered, which would fall into the qualitative factor. Technical analysis, no such worry. Why? Your focus is just two things: share price and share volume. Fundamental analysis, because of your in-depth analysis, these are mostly used by investors who are in for the long term. Technical analysis are used by mostly the traders who are in for the short time. They get into the market, buy today, sell tomorrow kind of an attitude. That's the final. So the final difference is fundamental analysis is mostly used by long-term investor for your long-term investment, and technical analysis is mostly used for short-term trading. Now, when we go through these differences, you will be having an understanding where you'll think, okay, fundamental analysis meaning only for long term, technical only for short term. Technical, yes, only for short term, but what you see practically in the environment is they base their decision on fundamental analysis. A lot of investors who want to invest for the long term, they pick their shares based on fundamental analysis. So when you do your analysis, you will get a target price. Looking at the target price and the current price, they will see whether there is a huge increase, and depending on that, they will pick the relevant share to invest. Okay, but even though they pick the share, practically what happens is you have to take a decision. Okay, I'm going to invest in Lanka IOC shares. Okay, that's your decision. Why? There's a possibility of fuel price increases, or because of that now you're picking Lanka IOC as your share. Good. Are you going to buy today itself at any price that is there in the market? No. A good investor will use technical analysis to know, okay, what is the lowest point of the share? Today it's trading at a high price. Will it fall tomorrow? Is that pattern visible in the past pattern? They use technical analysis to know when to enter into a share. When to buy a share is given or is guided using technical analysis. Okay, so investors base their entry point, when to enter, that decision based on technical analysis. But the decision to pick the stock will be solely decided on fundamental analysis. I hope I was clear to you. Let me show you an example. So this was when I was working, what we do. So you have a position called research analyst. So what our job role would be like, we would research on company shares. We do the fundamental analysis on behalf of investors and we recommend the share. Okay, so it's an ancillary service. We fall into the market, financial market service providers. For the to benefit the investors, we do the fundamental analysis for them and recommend the share. So this is a financial model that we do based on the company. Now this is a textile manufacturer in our local market, looking at their past prices and on their future demand. We predict 3 to 5 years. Here we have gone for just 2 years initially. So I hope you could see this. So we look at their current capacity, whether there will be a capacity improvement, utilization improvement, whether price per meter will improve. So price per meter is going to depend on the cotton prices. So ideally what we do is we try to see where the cotton prices are moving in the global context. Okay, all this we have to analyze before we forecast the company performance. So the product wise contribution, what is the high margin product for the company, what is the low margin product for the company, will the company get more orders for the high margin or will they move to a new product? It's a very interesting area, a lot of research and a lot of knowledge gathering in that process. Okay, so this is the kind of in detail analysis. So even we go down to predict the distribution, the admin cost. Now remember, these are not just bookwork. You just don't study everything and predict. You talk to so many people as well. You talk to the company's board, you talk to the company's management, get their input on the future performance, how the future decisions are going to be, and incorporate them into this fundamental analysis. So using all that, we forecast the next 2 years of the company and we arrive at the target price of that particular company. So we expect a huge increase for that company in the upcoming 12 months, and thereafter in the balance 2 months, in the balance 12 months, there will be a slight stabilization in the price. So those we could expect with the fundamental analysis. But if you go for something like technical analysis, so I told you we incorporate both to make a decision. We see how the share price, so this is the share price of that particular company, how the share price has reacted with the all share price index, whether the bandwidth of the price is being kept along those movement. When it continues, if we assume that this is going to continue in the future, how is it going to be? And then we decide a bandwidth price to enter the share. Okay, the ideal price to enter the share would be between, let's say, 14 to 15 is what we look at. In the recent month, it would have increased, but this is the stabilized price or the good price that we could expect to get in. So making that decision, we tell investors, okay, this is a share that we would recommend you to buy, better to buy at a this particular price range. Okay, so these are the decisions you make when you pick a share in the stock market. So the value of it, you can't 100% be accurate like a bond valuation, because bond valuation, everything was given to you, everything is communicated. The benefit was certainty, remember. But when we come to the share market, the stock market, here the uncertainty is what gives you the risk, and this risk is what's going to give you the highest upside or the profit as well. So you need to be able to play along. I hope that was clear to you. There are certain modules which are very, very technical. This is for a white good company that we did. So you could see the in detail, you have to go through all their past financials, you have to see their past performance as well, correct? We are going to predict their future performance. So looking at that, you will get into your workings, how this is a white good company, whether the demand for white good is going to be there, how it's going to improve, the exchange rate fluctuations, the exchange risk, all those have to be analyzed and incorporated into your working. So with that, you could see the prediction or the target prices being given out. So that target price, you use your technical analysis as well to see again at which point you need to enter this share so that you could maximize your profit. Any doubts? Okay. So with that, we are done with stock market as well. So the general concepts with regarding to equity market and equity instruments are now completed. Now we are going to move into our own market, the Colombo Stock Exchange. You have the summary of what we studied earlier. All these summaries are just going to help you when you're going through before your exams to know where the topics are, whether you have studied every area properly. I have done this summary for you as a guide. Go through those summaries after you study in detail. Go through the summary to ensure your weakest area and your most confident area. Make sure you tackle the entire syllabus. I don't recommend you just studying the past paper and going in, because if you have gone through the past papers, the recent past papers especially, the pattern is being changed so that the predictability is questioned. Okay, so understand that pattern. Now moving to Colombo Stock Exchange. In Sri Lanka, we have only one stock exchange, which is Colombo Stock Exchange. So that is the nucleus or the center point of our capital market in Sri Lanka. Who is regulating Colombo Stock Exchange? Is it central bank? No. It is regulated by Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka. You are going to learn about this commission. That's the one I was talking about at the beginning of the lesson. They have a new act. They have replaced their old act. You will study that in the upcoming classes. Know that Colombo Stock Exchange is regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission of Sri Lanka. We celebrated 35 years of our stock exchange this year, 35 years of operating. And why this exchange is important to us? It is the platform which allows you and I, not only you and I, even institutional investors to invest, increase their wealth, and also allowing companies to source their required capital for enhancement and improvement. So how is our stock exchange structured? Our stock exchange has a subsidiary called the Central Depository System, 100% owned This Central Depository System Private Limited supports the Colombo Stock Exchange by giving them the necessary depository services. So if you are going to be a investor in the Colombo Stock Exchange, you have to have a CDS account. It's like your share account. Now you have a bank account with money. This is an account with your securities. So what shares you invest, what debentures you hold, all those are recorded in the CDS account, which is under your NIC. So ideally on top of this, on top of Colombo Stock Exchange, you will have the Securities and Exchange Commission overlooking the Colombo Stock Exchange. So what are the products that are available in Colombo Stock Exchange for us to invest? You can break it down into three main categories. They have equity products, they have debt products, and they have exchange traded or structured products as well. So under now this particular diagram was what they introduced in late 2019. So in 2 years back, we only had LKR denominated shares, we had debentures, we had warrants, we had close-ended funds. Let me take this image elsewhere. Okay, I'm unable to zoom in. So in late 2019, they only had these. And they were going to introduce multi-currency equities, equities which are denominated in Forex, real estate investment trust, exchange traded funds to the market. So there were three products which were yet to be introduced into our stock exchange. Then in mid of 2019, we saw real estate investment trust being introduced. And now we also have a dedicated multi-currency board being introduced for multi-currency equities. We just don't have a company yet under that board, but there is a special listing board available if a foreign company wants to list their shares. We only have exchange traded funds which are yet to be rolled out. This was the article relating to real estate investment trust. Now, if you look at this article, real estate investment trust finally coming. This article was published in 2019, beginning of 2019, but the regulation or the actual needed preparations was finished around mid of 2020, just last year. But this particular product was already available in the global context, especially in the US. It was developed in the 1960s. So you can imagine how long it took for Sri Lanka to get this product. Okay. So it was introduced in US in 1960, now only coming into our market, and it's a new product to our market. Real estate investment trust. Know the abbreviation, know what the abbreviation means. Okay, these are just possible ways for examiners to trick you at a MCQ at least. So know what it actually means. Real estate investment trust. What is a real estate investment trust? This is not in your syllabus, but I am including it because it's a new product to the stock exchange, possibility of testing you in the exam because it's a new development. So be aware on what the product is. Now, when you look at the product name, real estate investment trust. Remember, we had a product called unit trust. What does unit trust do? They collect money from small retail investors, create a pool of funds, and they use that pool of funds to invest in securities, shares, or debentures according to their mandate. What do I mean by mandate? According to their permission given by the Security Exchange Commission, they will invest in the relevant securities. If they have obtained permission to invest in shares, then they will invest in shares. If they have taken permission for debentures, then debentures. Okay, so according to their mandate, they will use that money to invest in securities. Just like that is how a real estate investment trust is going to be. Retail investors like you and myself will give our money to a managing company, to the investment trust. They will take all our money and have a pool, have a fund built. So I will contribute 100,000, 100,000. So all these will be collected to, let's say, about 100 million. This fund is now being used to invest in real estate. So this money, the company will use this money to buy and manage apartments, malls, office spaces, warehouses, hospitals, okay, real estate related properties. So they will use that money to invest in them and also to manage that property. And using that, the income they generate is being given out to the investors. On a global context, real estate investment trusts have a payout of 90%, which has the highest payout. So if a real estate investment trust, let's say, makes a profit of 100,000, 90,000 has to be paid out to the investors in terms of dividends. It's the balance 10,000 that they can hold for themselves to make any improvements to the property or to do any maintenance. Only that particular amount. Minimum of 90% has to be paid out. Okay, this is how the structure is on a global context, and it's the same structure that is being adopted locally as well. So in the local context, in our Colombo Stock Exchange, we have real estate investment trust being introduced to the market as a subcategory of unit trust. What is the Security Exchange Commission telling you? Look here, because the structure is similar to unit trust, you consider them in the as a subcategory of a unit trust because the format is the same. What do? They pool money from public investors and they buy property, real estate, which can be residential, commercial, malls. Well, now if I say commercial, it will be malls, warehouses, everything. It can be even hospitals. All those properties can be acquired. What is the benefit of real estate or the return of real estate investment trust? Is the rental income that you get from that and the capital appreciation of that property. So if you sell a property, that particular capital gain. Okay, all those are returned to the investors. Because this is issued in Sri Lanka, it is called SL REIT. Usually you call it the REIT because it's issued in Sri Lanka, you add SL in front of it. What is mandated, compulsory for a REIT is only listed real estate investment trusts are allowed in our country. Unlisted or private real estate investment trusts or not allowed. Why was it done? So that if a REIT is listed, there's a lot of transparency. They are regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Someone's monitoring them. Then public funds have very less or minute chances of being misused. But if you have an unlisted REIT or a privately arranged REIT, you don't know how the investment is going, how the managing company is using your money. So there are chances of fraudulent activity. To prevent them, it's mandated in our country, it has to be listed for a real estate investment trust to work. I hope I'm clear. Now, before we move into benefits of real estate investment trust, let me just give you a brief idea why this product came in. Now, if you see our country, the growth pattern or the push to our growth came after, of course, the war. After the war ended, the growth started skyrocketing. A lot of investments came into our country. So with that, they saw real estate in our country was getting a high focus. The price of real estate was moving. To get the benefit of this increasing real estate is how this REIT was first introduced in US. So in the United States of America, when their growth pattern started kicking in, when their real estates was having an escalation in prices, their Congress understood, why don't we use this and give this increasing price benefit to the public as well. So they introduced or structured this investment trust called as the REIT, so that the benefit of increasing real estate is passed to the general public who don't have the ability to buy real estate on their own. Now, for example, if I only have 100,000 rupees, can I buy an apartment in Altair? What are the other apartments that we know? Apartment in Waterfront, or let's say apartment in Shangri-La. Okay, very famous example. With 100,000, can I do that? Obviously not. But if there is a real estate investment trust, now I can input my 100,000 to that investment trust. That fund will then buy an apartment in Shangri-La. Why? It's not only my money. A lot of public in being investing their money, and that money is now being used for investment. So they will use that particular money and buy that apartment. So whenever the apartment at Shangri-La is having a price appreciation, now I get the benefit as well. Individually, I don't have the ability to buy that. But because of real estate investment trust, now I am getting that benefit as well. Do you understand? That's why this product was introduced. So for the general public will get the benefit of real estate increases as well. So investing in real estate investment trust is an affordable alternative. Why? Because if you see my early example, the minutest fraction of the cost is what you would put in to invest in a real estate. What is the price of a Shangri-La apartment and what am I investing? Okay. So with the tiniest investment, you still get the benefit of that price increase. Secondly, because it is listed in the stock exchange, we have high liquidity for this real estate investment trust. I can sell the units whenever I want and exit or even enter the real estate investment trust. And imagine the payout, 90% payout being given to the investors. Not even shares do that. Do shares have a minimum payout ratio like that mandated? No, here minimum 90%. So that's a benefit to the investors, and the investor is now getting a benefit of large real estate price appreciation even without owning it. These are the benefits of investing in a listed real estate investment trust. Now, if you take Sri Lanka, we have certain regulations that we need to comply if a real estate investment trust is coming in for listing. These were never tested in your exam, not even in the last session, but still, I have included it here just for your awareness at least. I told you a REIT in Sri Lanka has to be listed. It can't be privately held or unlisted. And you need to have a managing company. What does this managing company do? They take the investment decision, where to invest and how to invest. Okay. So if you are going into, if you're listing a real estate, now this is in the point of view of a managing company. If you're going into listing your real estate investment trust, you have to do it within 1 month after approval from Securities and Exchange Commission. The Exchange Commission will give you approval to go ahead, and within 1 month you need to give your listing application. Okay, you need to list all units of that real estate investment trust, and the units should be fully paid. It can't be partially paid. There is only 50% of the money now, balance later. No, nothing like that. There should be, no other commitment like that. It should be fully paid and free of all lien. Okay, and then it should be freely transferable. You cannot limit the transferability. The entire point of going into listing is to ensure transferability. All right. Then for a real estate investment trust to be listed, the minimum value of your real estate assets should be 500 million. So imagine, it has to be a very large real estate investment trust if it's wanting to be established in our stock exchange. Again, why this requirement? So that minor companies or minor investment trusts don't come here and there and mislead the market. So minimum of 500,000 is what's needed, and at least free float of 20% with 100 public unit holders has to be there to ensure that public free float is maintained. Not all the units are being controlled by one particular party. To avoid that, free float should be 20% of the units being held by at least 100 public unit holders. And finally, there is a requirement which is a lock-in requirement. What do you mean by lock-in requirement? The initiator or the strategic investor or the sponsor of this entire arrangement should hold on to the units for at least 6 months. Why do you have that? Because certain managing company would say, okay, they will promote saying, okay, even this party has invested. It's a positive thing. Now, looking at that, so many public investors, the retail investors would come in to invest. But after they invest, this strategic investor would quickly move out. That's unfair. So to avoid such stuff happening, there is a lock-in period of 6 months where if there is a strategic investor or the sponsor of this entire REIT has to hold at least 30% of the total units, and that has to be continuously held for 6 months from the date of listing, so that no any fraudulent activities are done or any misleading activities are done. Okay, there is a attachment or a awareness pamphlet being sent out by the Colombo Stock Exchange together with the Securities Exchange Commission, which I would upload to the Google Classroom. You can go through that. So here you can see, I can't buy any property Even the real estate that I'm going to invest has certain condition. Now, can I buy an apartment which is half built? No, I have to buy an apartment which is fully completed. So if you look at Shangri-La Apartments now, okay, it fits my criteria. It's fully completed. What's the next criteria? It should be at least fully or partially occupied. Imagine you have an apartment which is completed, construction is done, but no one is occupied. Can you consider it as a real estate for REIT? No. It has to be partially occupied or fully occupied. Why? Then you have the third condition. Not only just occupancy, it should be generating new income. It can be rental income or the payout income, but it should give you income. Okay. And you could see here what are the types of properties that are allowed under REIT, SL REIT. Residential properties, commercial buildings, warehouses, hospitals, hotels, even infrastructure projects are allowed under SL REIT. So this is the structure that they have. The benefits are being given out. Then they're talking about who are the participants, the managing company, the trustee, the sponsor, the property, the compliance officer, the parties who are involved in these entire arrangements. And this is very important to you. Now I told you, if you have a portfolio, you take the decision on the composition. If you have a portfolio, you take the decision whether you're going to invest 100% into shares, whether it's 50% shares, 30% debentures, and 20% in cash. But if you have a real estate investment trust, a managing company is operating a real estate investment trust, the Securities and Exchange Commission has put a rule which says maximum only 80% of that fund can be in real estate. The balance 20% has to be in liquid investment such as government securities or cash or near cash. Why such a regulation? To avoid any illiquid REIT. Let's say there is a sudden collapse or sudden requirement, then if all their investment is in real estate, can they get out of it soon? No. To avoid such a scenario, to ensure liquidity is maintained, they want at least 20% in near cash instruments. 80-20 is the rule. But if the managing company wants and has a good excuse, a good reason, then they could apply to SEC for approval to exceed this 80. But remember, only if SEC approves, they could breach this 80% requirement. These are the other details of REITs. Again, good for you to go through to get a good idea. I will send this out to be uploaded to your Google Classroom as well. So REIT is now in our market, but we have that product available, but there's no any REIT being listed at the moment. Same thing to multi-currency equities. When you go on, you will see we have a particular board to allow multi-currency equities, but we don't have a equity at the moment. But we have all the platform being ready. If a company wants, our market is capable to cater such a requirement. Now we are moving into the listing boards of the Colombo Stock Exchange. Now we went through the products which are available in our Colombo Stock Exchange. What's the main product? Of course, equities. So now we are going to look at where can I invest my, or where can I list my equity. A company wants to get listed stock exchange, and the stock exchange, I told you, have certain group. They can't have all companies, certain classifications. Why? Then it's easier. Those are like the levels. Now, for example, if they call in for a vacancy, let's say there is a vacancy for assistant manager and manager. There is a requirement for an assistant manager, requirement for a manager, requirement for an AGM. Okay. Can anyone come and apply for positions? No. There is a certain role, a feature, a eligibility criteria. If you are fulfilling that eligibility criteria, you fall into that bucket. Why do they have such a requirement? So that the right person falls into the right category. Just like that, in Colombo Stock Exchange, they have 4 listing boards. Main board, Dirisavi board, and 2 other boards which were recently introduced. Earlier, if you were studying for A-level commerce, you only studied 2 boards, main board and Dirisavi board. Now, we have 2 other boards called Empower board and Multi-currency board. What are we going to look at now? We are going to look at what are these boards, what kind of company falls into these boards, so that you are aware. Let's say if a company is saying, one of your customers is saying, okay, I'm going to get listed in the stock exchange, I will get money and all those, you can assess looking at their financials. Okay, what kind of a board will they fall in? Now, if they don't fall into the 4 boards, can they get listed in the stock exchange? No. So for your awareness purpose as well, for your life, it's important. Now, first and the most significant boards in our Colombo Stock Exchange is the main board. Main board, first let's go through the particular board and we'll go through the eligibility criteria. Then, by looking at the criteria, let's understand what kind of a company are they expecting in that particular board. Okay. So, under main board, what are the eligibility criteria? They want companies whose stated capital is at minimum 500 million. Not a small amount of money. Stated capital has to be 500 million. Huh? Not net worth, not total equity. Before retained earnings, the stated capital itself has to be 500 million. Positive net assets for last 2 years. So this company, after they use their total assets to settle off liabilities, should have a positive net asset of 2 for the last 2 years. Net profit after tax for 3 consecutive years. Before you apply for listing, the consecutive 3 years. Let's say this year you're applying to be listed, 2020, 2019, 2018. All 3 years, you should record a net profit. And minimum public holding has to be 20% of its shares held with minimum number of shareholders are 500 shareholders. So imagine minimum number of public shareholders are itself 500. What kind of a company is this? Definitely a large corporate. Fine. Let's look at Dirisavi board now. Dirisavi board. What are the eligibility criteria? Stated capital minimum of 100 million. So anything less cannot qualify into the Risavi board. Now look at main board and this. Okay, main board required 500. Here 100. Which means, okay, not established corporates, maybe a emerging company could fall into this category. Positive net asset for last financial year, but main board wanted for last 2 years. Okay. Minimum public holding 10%. At least 10% of the shares should be with the public, the free float. And that 10% should be at least be with 200 shareholders. Not 500 as main board, but here at least 200. An operating history of 1 year. So we didn't say operating history criteria for main board. We saw a net profit criteria. But here we see a operating history criteria. Okay, that's a difference in that. But they only want you to have an operating history of 1 year. So a new company also can qualify into this board as long as they have been operating for 1 year. Now there's something I want you to note. In your past papers, this public holding would have differed. Earlier it was 25 and 1000, which got now decreased to 20 and 500. So be careful when you do your past papers. Let's go into the other board, multi-currency board. Remember multi-currency equities we saw? So now we have a dedicated listing board for such instrument. Now in this board, in this listing board, can a local company come? Can a local company like, let's say, Ceylon Tobacco Company issue their shares in dollars in our market itself? No. This particular board allows for shares only of foreign companies. That's first you should remember. So foreign companies can list their shares in our market through the multi-currency board. Now when they are coming to list their share, can they list their share in any currency they want? No. That particular currency has to be approved by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka for it to be listed in our multi-currency board. Second. Now this particular board is multi-currency equity. Assume there's a share denominated in dollars, in euros and whatnot. Do I have dollars? Are you having euros in our purses every day? No, it's foreign currency. There are regulations for you to disclose. There are ways that you will earn it. So can you and I buy in multi-currency equities? No. So in multi-currency board, only non-resident investors are allowed to invest and trade. Resident investors cannot invest and trade. It is the non-resident investors who can invest in these shares. That also through their local custodian banks. Fourth and the most important thing you need to know. Think about this. We have a multi-currency board, which means we are allowing foreign companies to list their shares in our country. Now let's say you are Security Exchange Commission. Okay, you get an application from a foreign company. Let's say the foreign company is in Malaysia. Okay, company in Malaysia wants to list their equity here. Now in that application, when you go through, you see that, okay, this company is a new company. It's an unlisted company, which is first time trying to get listing in Sri Lanka. Isn't it fishy for you? A Malaysian company, why don't they list in Malaysia itself? Why are they coming all the way to Sri Lanka to get listed, and that for the very first time? There is a concern there. Hence, Multi-currency board has regulated, look here, if a foreign company is coming to list in multi-currency board, it has to be first listed in their own country stock exchange, in the country of its incorporation. Okay, the stock exchange of the country of its incorporation, it has to be listed there first. Then as a secondary listing, yes, they could come to Sri Lanka, not as a primary listing. Why do they do that? To avoid that concern. Sometimes certain foreign companies which are not eligible to get listed in their own country. Why? Because their equity can be weak, their net worth can be very poor, operating history is not there. So such weak companies, if they get listed in our stock exchange, and if the company collapses, what happens? Confidence in our stock exchange gets hit. To avoid that, you have this regulation. So if it's multi-currency board, remember these 4 rules. So what are the eligibility criteria? Earlier in main board and Divisavi board, the criteria were in rupees. Can you give the same criteria here? No, it has to be in foreign currency terms. So capital shouldn't be less than $10 million or in equivalent currency. Minimum of $10 million should be its capital. Positive net assets should be reported for last 3 years. Main board was only 2 years. Net profit again for 3 consecutive years before you apply. Finally, audited financial statements for the last 3 years without any modified audit opinion or emphasis of matter on going concern. I'll tell you the reason for this eligibility as well. For now, understand there is a new requirement for audited financial statements as well. 4th board for listing. This was very recently introduced, called the Empower Board. Empower Board is there for small and medium scale companies to have access to our equity market. Now these companies are in the very early stages of growth. So for them to have access to capital, there needed to be a separate board. Hence, Empower Board was introduced. What are the regulations if you are going to be listed in the Empower Board? Stated capital should be minimum 25, maximum 200. Minimum 25, maximum 200 is the gap. If it's above 200, depending on Dirisavi or main board, it will fall into that category. In the event, if you're coming into a IPO, if you're coming into a public offering and it's for the first time, then a stated capital of minimum 10 million is sufficient. But if you're using other methods, minimum is 25. Positive net asset for at least 1 year is required. Operating history of 2 years. Total assets of that company should be a maximum of 600. Now you'll be wondering, did I tell it correctly? Maximum of 600? Yes. Because it's a small and medium scale company. If your total asset is going to be above 600, that means obviously your stated capital is high. You might as well go into other boards. So to ensure SMEs are listed in this board, you have an asset restriction as well. Finally, audited financial statements should be given out. The audited financial statements for the financial year, which is immediate of the application. Now, if you're applying it this year, last year, 2020's audited financial should not carry a modified audit opinion or a emphasis of matter on going concern. Okay. Finally, if you are going to apply for this Empower board, you can't come alone. You have to apply through someone called the sponsor. Let's see the reasons. Okay. So you have 4 boards, a lot of eligibility requirements. Let's go through the summary. I have the summary in your note. Now this summary is going to tell us a lot of information. Okay, so I have all these put into for your convenience. Okay, ideally you should be doing this summary for studying purpose. Now look at this. All 4 boards, all the eligibility criteria are given out. Now, can you see in all 4 boards, you have a stated capital requirement. You have a positive net asset requirement. Profitability is not there in all 4, but whenever profitability is not there, you have an operating history criteria. Can you see that pattern? Now let me explain you why. What is the goal of Colombo Stock Exchange? Security Exchange Commission and Colombo Stock Exchange ensures that the market confidence is not shaken, is not broken. They want to ensure good companies come into listing so that the public is confident when they invest in the market. So they want to only allow strong companies in their exchange. Now, when you're bringing in strong companies, now if you take financial performance and financial position, can you say a strong company is someone with a lot of assets? No, you can't say that. Why? With lot of assets, they could have financed that asset with a lot of loans. So you can't measure the strength with total assets. How can you measure strength? Let's say the company goes into bankrupt, no money, no performance, loss, all the assets gone away. Still, a company can stand strong if their equity is sufficient. If they have equity to set off the needed debt, then of course they could withstand the external pressure. Correct? That's why, irrespective of the board, you mandatorily have a stated capital requirement and a positive net asset requirement. Now you will be wondering, okay, why they could have just had stated capital? Why are they having positive net asset? The reason is there are certain companies who have, all companies have stated capital, correct? But stated capital alone doesn't tell you the strength. Below stated capital, remember you have retained earnings. Now think, if your retained earnings is not retained earnings, it's retained loss. Then what happens? The retained loss has to be compensated with stated capital. So if you're only focusing on stated capital and not looking at anything else, you won't see that loss. So yes, stated capital is important. With that, positive net asset is also important. You can have the largest stated capital ever, but if it's not a positive net asset, oh no, you're not eligible. Now take about this particular entity. You have the finance company. Okay, now we are going to look at their balance sheet. Now let's say I'm only looking at stated capital when I'm going to allow this company into listing. Oh, very good. They have a stated capital of nearly 4 billion. Excellent company. Wow, a very strong company. I'm not looking at any other numbers. 4 billion, definitely main board. When I scroll down, good lord, how much is the accumulated loss? Can you see? Just by stated capital, I can't measure the strength. So with stated capital, to ensure that the strength is there, to ensure that you have to have a positive net asset requirement. There is no any number requirement there. Now, stated capital, they tell you, look here, not minimum, not maximum, this particular amount. They give an amount there. For net positive asset, so positive net asset, they don't give an amount. As long as it's positive, they are comfortable. But it has to be positive. Here, is it positive? What is net asset? Total asset minus total liability. This is your net asset position. It's negative. Which means owner owes more money. Owner has to bring in more money now. Doesn't highlight strength. Hence, with stated capital, you bring a positive net asset requirement as well. What has the largest, the most stronger companies are expected in the main board. So you have a minimum of 500 million at least stated capital needed for the main board, and positive net assets are needed for 2 years. Dirisavi board, you can't, because those companies are still emerging. They are they are kind of stabilized but still improving themselves to be a larger corporate. Hence, stated capital minimum of 100 million, but net positive net asset of at least 1 year immediately preceding the date of application. Empower board, very budding stage companies. Their stated capital is minimum 25, maximum 200. If they are going for an IPO, minimum 10. Positive net asset again, like Dirisavi board, just 1 year. Now, even though they are SME, exchange is not willing to remove the positive net asset requirement. Why? It is important. They want to ensure stronger SMEs are being brought to the board, brought to the market. Okay, so stronger corporates ideally fall into main board. Emerging or stabilizing companies fall into Dirisavi. Budding SMEs fall into Empower. Now think about multi-currency board. What kind of companies do you want to attract under multi-currency board? Think from the country's point of view. Do you want emerging companies in our market? We want stabilized large corporates, large foreign companies coming into our market. They are established. We want such kind of companies to come here. That's why minimum stated capital should be $10 million and positive net asset for at least 3 years, the highest requirement. The strongest of all is needed for the multi-currency board. Now you go for profitability. Now there are 4 types of companies now. In the local context, the strong corporate, stabilizing company, in the emerging stabilizing medium is in the Dirisavi, budding SME is in Empower. Now, can you expect budding SMEs to have good profits? They are now only starting. So they can't have continuous profits. They can have profit 1 year, loss 1 year. Yes, it will fluctuate. Why? They are very much exposed to the economic cycle. Same thing you can expect for Dirisavi board as well. Why? Even though they are stabilized, they are still in the growth stage. Can you expect frequent losses with a large established corporate? Hence, profitability requirements are given to the boards where they expect strong companies. So net profits for 3 consecutive years are required for both main board and multi-currency board. Now, when they can't give the profitability criteria, they compensate that with the operating history criteria. They say, okay, look here, you might not have profitability consecutively for years, but you need to have experience doing business. Can a company just wake up today? Okay, I incorporated today. Can I get listed in the stock exchange? No. You need to get the experience of doing business. How is your market? Can you survive in the market? All those have to be known. So, you cannot have profits, it's okay, but you need to be at least operating in the market for 1 year, operating in the economy, doing your business for 1 year if you're in Dirisavi board, Empower board for at least 2 years. Why is Dirisavi getting a concession here? Because already they have a good equity position. So they are willing to give a leeway in operating history. But Empower board is budding SME. You have to be very careful. Because if you allow the wrong SME and the SME collapses, public funds are lost. So at least 2 years you have to operate in the economy, in the industry. So you will understand how it works. Then of course you have the public float requirement for main and Dirisavi board, not for the multi-currency and Empower board. Audited financials are also required for the multi-currency and Empower board. The new two boards have a requirement for audited financials. Why are we requiring audited financials for only these two and not for main and Dirisavi? There are two reasons. Why do we need for multi-currency board? These are foreign companies. Okay, we don't know how this company is operating in their country. Whether in their country the company has a good future, whether it's frequently having losses, all those we are not sure. Their governance is how well are they governing the company, the corporate governance, the ethics, and so forth. Hence, we rely on the auditor. We rely on the auditor on their report to see whether their financial statements are correctly represented, whether there is no any frauds. This company is operating abroad, right? Not our people are there. So that auditor report is going to be a benefit to us. Then we see whether there is any concern on the going concern of the company. Is there an issue of this foreign company continuing in the future? So to ensure that, we rely on audited financial statements for 3-year audit opinion. Now, why do we need that for SME? It's a local company. Why do we need for that? It's a local company, yes, but it's a SME, still budding company. They might not be aware of regulations or corporate governance or ethics. They might not be aware about accounting, not having money to hire professionals. So if you have an auditor, the auditor will ensure that the financial statements are represented correctly. There is no any misstatements. And also they will see whether there is any risk to the going concern of the company. So the alarm can be raised by the auditor. Hence, you have an auditor requirement for these two boards. Finally, Empower board has a total asset and a sponsor criteria. Why do you have it here? Total assets are enforced for Empower so that certain companies big corporates who don't fall into these two boards can hide themselves as SMEs and classify themselves under Empower board. To prevent that, you have a total asset cap being introduced. Sponsor, why do you have sponsor is because these are SMEs, right? They don't know how to list. They have no experience. They don't have the capital market knowledge as you and I. So then for them to get the help when they before they come to the equity market. Now remember, investment managers advise, okay, this is the right time to go for an issuance, this is the right price. To get all those advice, SEC has mandated, look here, if you're applying to get listed, come through a sponsor. Who is the sponsor? These are the accredited sponsors. So you could get the help of these companies if they are going to come into listing. So these company will give the relevant advisors for them on their listing procedure. You don't have to know what companies are there, but understand a sponsor is there to help out the SME so that they have the knowledge, the background, the awareness on how the structuring or how the listing has to be done. Finally, okay, now we went through share listing boards, the 4 boards. What about debt? The second most famous one is debt, right? How is debt being listed? Do you have boards for that? No. Debentures are also allowed for listing under Colombo Stock Exchange. Now, who can issue debentures? Who can issue shares? Company only. Remember, government cannot issue shares. But debenture can come from both parties. So, depending on the issuer, the regulation changes. Now, if it's a government entity who is coming for listing for their debentures, okay? Let's see their debenture regulations to get listed. They expect that government entity to have a guarantee. What kind of a guarantee? It has to be unconditional and irrevocable. Unconditional meaning the guarantor shouldn't have any condition. Okay, only if this happens, I will give the money back. Only if this happens, I will consider for a payback. If this happens, I will only give 50%. No, no such conditions. Whatever happens, if this company defaults, the guarantor will pay. So they expect an unconditional guarantee. Next, it has to be irrevocable as well. Let's say when electricity board is issuing their debenture, government is giving a guarantee. And when they give the guarantee, they say, okay, we give this guarantee, but it can get revoked on these kind of situations. What happens to the public? Public is now scared. Okay, see here, this guarantee can be revoked anytime if this happens. So there is a concern, there is a risk. To avoid that, they expect the issuer of that debenture, who is a government entity, to come with a guarantee which is unconditional and irrevocable. And that guarantee can be from 3 parties. What are the 3 parties? It can be, of course, from the government of Sri Lanka itself, or it can be from a bank which is licensed by the central bank. And if it's a bank, that bank should have a minimum rating of A. If it's below, okay, no, you can't go for that bank. Finally, you can also get a guarantee from international, multilateral, or even a bilateral agency. So government, banks, international, multilateral, or bilateral agencies can give this guarantee. What is this guarantee for? Guaranteeing the repayment of both capital and interest. Okay. You could do all this, or let's say you don't want to get a guarantee. what can you do? You can get your debenture rated by a rating agency, and if it has a investment grade, yes, you could go in for the listing. Think of a company now. If it's a company who is coming in for debenture listing, now this is a private entity. It can be unlisted or even a listed entity, but it's a private entity. Okay, it's not backed by the government, so the regulations will be a little bit tougher. Let's see the regulations. If it's a company, body corporate, which is coming for listing, they have to have a rating. The issuer and the issuance should have a rating, and it should have a rating above, one notch above the investment grade. Now, what is the investment grade? Triple B or above is investment grade. If you are a government entity, your debt security can have an investment grade rating. So even triple B qualifies if you are a government entity. But if you are a company, triple B doesn't get qualified. One notch above triple B, which means triple B plus. Why do they have that? Because it's a company. This is a government entity. The chances of a default for a government entity is very less. Hence, even if it's triple B and it still has a downgrade, chances are low, still has a downgrade, there is a government backing for that. But here it's a company. If it falls below triple B, definitely it falls into speculative and no other way out. No one to rescue the company. Hence, to avoid such a risk, they say one notch above. So at least triple B plus. So in case of a downgrade, next they will fall into triple B, which is still in investment grade. Correct? So to ensure that they want, if it's a company, the rating has to be one notch above investment grade. And this is mandatory. For government entity, they had the choice. You could go for a guarantee or go for a rating. But here you have to go for a rating, and the rating has to be above investment grade. If the company wants, on their own discretion, they can. Now let's say you have to do both of this, and if you want, you could bring in a guarantee as well. Again, that guarantee has to be unconditional and irrevocable. Who can they get the guarantee from? We saw three parties: government, banks, international, multilateral, bilateral agencies. How can the company get the guarantee? Can they get a guarantee from the government? Obviously no. Government gives guarantee for their entities. So government is out of the question. So they have only two parties left to get the guarantees. A bank which has a credit rating of A and above, licensed by central bank. Then finally you have the international and international, multilateral or bilateral agency giving you the guarantee. Again, what is this guarantee for? Guarantee for the repayment of capital and interest. With this, there is another regulation for a company as well. Now, certain companies, now here can you remember, now here it says rating shall be one notch above investment grade. Now, what certain companies started doing was, they started going for opinion shopping. What do you mean by opinion shopping? You have several rating agencies. You get rating from one agency, another rating from another agency, rating from another agency. Then you pick the best rating and you go for that particular rating. Let's say we have only two rating agencies in Sri Lanka, Fitch and ICRA. Okay. Now, if you have, now let's say Fitch is rating me, I'm a company, Fitch is rating me AA. Okay. There is another, no, Fitch is rating me triple B. ICRA is rating me, let's say, B plus, a triple B plus. Obviously, I know if I get triple B plus, I can get listed. So I will only show the ICRA rating to the exchange. No. To avoid such an opportunity, what the exchange mandates is, look here, if you're getting your rating from more than one rating agency, then the lowest of the ratings given has to be your rating. So if I do the same activity, I can't use the triple B plus, I have to use the triple B. They have that regulation to ensure that the investors don't be at a disadvantage. With that, what are the other regulations? If you are issuing a debenture, the tenor of the debenture, minimum, what is the minimum tenor? Is it 5? Minimum is 2 years. Can you have a 1-year debenture? No, then it becomes a money market instrument. So minimum tenor has to be 2 years at least for it to be a debenture, for it to be a capital market instrument. Par value is 100. You can subscribe it in 10,000 or in multiples of 10,000. And if the issuer has a security which is already in watch list category in the stock exchange, he cannot issue a new debt security. So remember that. In a way, you watch list a security if there is a probability of a default. So if the same issue is issuing a new security, there will be a concern in the market. So avoid that. If a issuer's debt security is already in the watch list category, you cannot issue a new debt security. Then we have default board. What is a default board? Now remember, default board is not a listing board. It's a watch board. What do you mean by watch board? It's a board that classifies companies which are in violation or which are in non-compliance. Now think about this. These companies have a huge hurdle when they want to list them in the Colombo Stock Exchange. Okay, when they come in for listing, there are so many eligibility criteria for each board. They jump over, they qualify. Okay, now you're listed in the Colombo Stock Exchange. After you do that, can you chill and wait? No problem. I can now have losses, now have negative assets, do everything. No. You have something called continuous listing rules to ensure the company stays or improves. The exchange has certain rules. Okay. Now, if those continuous rules are breached, then the company will get immediately classified into a default board. This is a board where companies which are non-compliant to the CSE listing rules, continuous listing rules, will fall into. For example, if the company doesn't disclose the annual report on time, if they don't give out the interims on time, when they purposely delay their finances, there's something wrong, correct? So when they do such an activity, they fall into the default board. Now you can, when you move into a default board, the exchange asks you for reason. Why are you delaying your annual report? Why are you delaying your financial statements? Now sometimes audit opinion, if there is emphasis of matter, give me clarification. Until then, you are in the default board. And the exchange gives you a time. Okay, I give you 3 months to address this. I give you 2 months to address this. Within that time frame, you need to address that issue. Let's say if you are unable to resolve your issue in 1 month of staying in default board, then exchange releases a press release as to why you are in the default board for 1 month. If it exceeds 3 months, Then the Colombo Stock Exchange will inform SEC, look here, this is in the board, this is in the default board for such a long time, this is the reason for violation, we have given them this time, this is the recovery plan they proposed. If there is anything, it's up to you to take necessary action. Okay, so default board is not a listing board, it's like a board where non-compliant or violating entities are being grouped. Okay, now we are moving to our indices. What are the indices in the Colombo Stock Exchange? We have two indices, all share price index and standard and poor price index. We don't have much time to go through about that, so we'll cover it up on Tuesday. So when we start on Tuesday, we'll finish off the latter end of this lesson. Then we are moving into something called industry classification, very interesting area. You have listing boards, correct, but you have certain sector classification in our stock market as well. How those sector classifications improved in our country. And then we have circuit breakers. What are circuit breakers? Why do you need circuit breakers? And how these circuit breakers are structured. So all this we will look on Tuesday. So Tuesday morning from 8 to 12, we will have our lesson. Of course, in between, I'll have some breaks in for you. It will be difficult, but it's an important lesson. So please be ready. We are going to look into the balance of this lesson and moving to structured financial products and derivatives. Very, very important criteria, very important topic. So be ready. There is a slight delay in me marking your papers for the last 2 weeks, but don't worry. I will try my best to get back to you. There's a small personal commitment from my end, hence a delay. But don't worry, the weekly question will go through. Please attempt and answer back to me. I will correct it and get back to you. So again, tomorrow you will have your questions being sent out of what we studied so far on equity. So be ready, answer them and reply back to me. All right. Continue your studies in the same momentum. If there is any concern, don't forget to drop me an email. Okay, so we'll meet again on Tuesday and continue the class. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.